Welcome to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call, a special call on the HUD Housing Counseling Certification Exam and Training. We're pretty excited. We're having a very strong showing. This will be our blockbuster call of the year. It's certainly blown out all our standards for this year and probably previous years. There's already over 200 of you on the call line and 400 people plus had registered. So thank you for really strong response, and I understand we have a number of people who are new to our calls, and so just to let you know, we're the National Housing Resource Center. We exist to provide advocacy and support for the nonprofit housing counseling community across the United States. We work with local organizations, we work nationally, we work with organizations big and small, intermediaries, networks, and local counseling agencies. We work in Congress, we work with the administration and in the regulatory field and with the departments, and we also do a lot of work to try to provide information to the housing counseling field. A lot of our initiatives around figuring out new funding sources and models for the housing counseling world to diversify our funding, and our innovations in housing counseling, listserv presentations. We do have calls twice a month, the first and third Thursdays of the month, and they're all done as this one's done, though they're usually an hour long. This one, because of the value and importance of the subject and the many contributions we've got, we're going to take 2 hours for this call. If you aren't on the Leaders in Housing Counseling listserv and would like to hear more about these kind of things, just go to our website, www.hsgcenter.org. Upper right-hand corner, there's a link to joining our mailing list. It's actually an email listserv, and you can sign up, and we'll get you put onto the list, and you can continue getting to know more about us. With that quick note, just to do a review of what's going to happen on the call, we're going to start with our congressional policy updates and the good work that Melody's been doing, which has continues to be very valuable. I'm going to do some updates just on the Leaders in Housing Counseling listserv and the little kerfuffle we've had over the last few weeks, and how we've regrooved. I think people know about this, but I'm happy to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page here and what we're trying to do. And Ellie's going to talk a little bit about the calls coming up, because I think, again, there's some deep, substantial dives we're going to be doing in our work that will be helpful to most counseling organizations. And then we are, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with FHFA and the IRLA and CFPB and the TRID, the Know Before You Owe assessment that CFPB is doing. But the bulk of the call is going to be on our certification exam and how to get counselors to the finish line, as we say up there. We've got a great group of people who've been deeply involved in this work, who are coming with lots of valuable ideas and insights and experience around how to make this work and successful. So that's really the bulk of the call. We will definitely do our NHRC membership plug at the very end, so please stick around for that, because it is what keeps us going, and I really appreciate the fact that so many of you have already joined and are renewing. And then there'll be the information about the next call coming up in July 25th. So let's quickly dive in. So Melody, tell us what's happening in Congress.
Thank you, Bruce. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'll be brief because we have a really robust conversation with a lot of really great speakers, and I imagine that's going to take the majority of this call. So on Tuesday, the Housing Financial Security Act of 2019 passed the House of Representatives. This was legislation that was bipartisanly supported. It was sponsored by Representative Beatty of Ohio, Democrat from Ohio, and Representative Stivers, her colleague Republican, that's also from Ohio. Essentially, what this bill does, for those who may not be aware, it requires HUD to discount FHA single-family mortgage insurance premium payments for first-time home buyers who complete a financial literacy housing counseling program. The discount is 25 basis points lower than the premium payment amount. This is a really amazing bill. We think it'll be great for the field, and we're excited that it's really bringing housing counseling to the attention of both the committee and the larger the House. We got word this week that there's going to be a companion bill in the Senate, and NHRC will definitely keep everyone posted. We're hoping that we can work with Senate members on making this bill bipartisan as well. There's a few candidates for co-sponsorship that we've heard from so far, including Representative Tim Scott from South Carolina, as well as Senator Portman from Ohio, which makes sense considering that the sponsor in the House was also from Ohio. But we'll keep everyone posted, on this bill.
And let me just add one quick point, which is we really worked hard both to support the legislation and to fine-tune it some. So one of the things we were arguing for is that the discount should only be available before you've signed a mortgage application and before you've signed a sales agreement. And as all of you as practitioners in the field know, these are the major financial decisions. If we can get in front of all that, that's when our work is the most impactful, and we can do our job in the most effective way. The legislation looked really good there for quite a while. We seem to have lost the sales agreement part. So the final wording that we've seen says that it has to be done before the mortgage application, but does not mention the sales agreement. We'll try to raise this also in the Senate version, and we're reaching out to the sponsors to see what happened. And this may have been the political back and forth of trying to get broad support. We'll figure that piece out, but it's part of the role that we're playing in all this.
Thank you. And we may be able to insert that same language in the Senate companion bill. So we'll definitely keep everyone posted. Moving on to appropriations. As we've discussed in previous calls, the Transportation HUD funding bill for fiscal year 2020 passed the House last month. It had the Housing Counseling Assistance Program funded at $60 million, which is a $15 million increase over the White House 2020 budget request, and a $10 million increase over fiscal year 2019 final numbers. It's now in the House HUD subcommittee's jurisdiction, but we haven't really heard much activity from that committee. We've reached out to several different senators on feedback and trying to get intel, and what we've heard is that they're still waiting on the budget caps issue to be addressed. Depending on what happens with that legislation, we may see very substantial budget cuts across the board for all programs of federal government. If that also happens, we may just see housing counseling stay at $50 million. We're not sure. Things are kind of in flux, which is why we're working so hard on outreach in the Senate to find a housing counseling champion, preferably a member of the Republicans, because the Republicans have majority in the Senate. Please, if everyone on the call, keep an eye out from me on emails regarding outreach and targeted calls for different Senate appropriations members, whether it be from the HUD subcommittee or from the larger committee. We've reached out to several different ones, including Senator Schatz, Senator Graham, Senator Shelby, Collins. We've had really great conversations with them and their housing counseling agencies in their state. We're hoping to keep the pressure on them so that they can at least preserve funding levels, if not increase it to $60 million, but we're hoping that we'll make some inroads and find a champion prior to when hearings begin. And if anyone has any questions, they can touch base with me later on in the call.
Thanks, Melody. It's really great that she's really leading the charge on this. If you're on this call and you're from West Virginia, reach out to Melody right after the call, because we have Senator Capito in the queue, and there's a planning call with groups tomorrow afternoon. So you're the next one in the queue. But if anybody gets an email from Melody, it's essential around our funding, and please respond right away. So thank you so much for all of that. Let me just quickly, so as you know, talking about the Leaders in Housing Counseling calls, we had an interesting couple weeks there where we had people who just insisted on replying all on non-content things about whether wanting to get off the call or instructing people about how to do the call. And, it was, some people got quite upset about it. And I get that. And we are happy to take people off the list or move them onto the headlines list. But it did trigger a whole discussion. And so Melody and Ellie did an intervention with me on this and came up with a plan that I think kind of addresses all this and hopefully makes your lives and your email boxes a little bit easier. One of the surprising triggers was this pictures. What is this, the phrase? A picture's worth 1,000 words. And while it was a very popular feature, it also was very unpopular with some people. And I think as Melody put it, it's not the right forum for a visual document. You really want to have content stuff in the email form, and so we're moving that over to the Facebook page. So you can still get these. Ellie's going to put them out every Monday, but do them through the Facebook page so that we'll still make them available. And I'll do a plug at the end of the call about getting more pictures because this really is a nice piece to our work. The other thing is that we just stopped allowing people to post on the listserv altogether. It just wasn't really producing that much of value. For a while there, I think we'd gotten to the place where people really only posted on high content amount things, but it seems like every year or 6 or 18 months there'd be kind of an explosion like this, and it has not proven the most effective. So if you have things that you want to respond, please email them to whoever, to one of us or all of us being Melody, Ellie, and me, and we'll figure out how to use that, and we can kind of turn it on and off your ability to post, and we may just have you post, or we may post it ourselves, or we may think about some other way to do it. Your feedback's really valuable. It is part of how we do our work. So I had been reluctant to do this because I really value what people in the field say. Obviously, didn't quite work the way we planned in the last few weeks. So now the mechanism will be to just email us. And you can reply to all. It just won't show up. It'll just show up to us. So that however you want to handle it is great. Thanks so much for the very nice notes I got from quite a few of you saying, you want to keep things as they are and don't want to lose the list and all that sort of stuff. None of that's going to happen. We have over 2,000 people on the listserv right now. It's a very vibrant thing. To lose 10 or 20 or 50 to 25 people on the list, we get an addition of 10 or so people every month. It's been a high growth factor for us and over the years, and it's doing fine, and we're doing fine, and we're just a bit of a learning curve. So thanks for everybody's input, and it was actually very helpful to get people's feedback on what to do, and special thanks to Melody and Ellie for coming up for a plan that works. So just in that vein, Ellie, do you want to explain what the next two calls are that are coming up on the Leaders in Housing Counseling calls?
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. So we have some interesting stuff coming up. Our next call is going to be about the intersection between health and housing. And we're going to be speaking with a couple of groups about how they have accessed some services and funding that were specifically targeted at healthcare and how they got involved as a housing counseling agency. So that's on July 25th. On August 1st, I'm working on a presentation that is targeted at looking at what housing counseling agencies are doing doing to really address some unmet needs, particularly in underserved and marginalized communities. I have a couple of presenters. If there is anybody on the call that feels like they're doing something pretty innovative around targeting and serving marginalized communities, I'd love to hear from you. My email address has already been posted in the chat box, so feel free to email me and I'll be in touch with you. So that's what is on deck for August 1st.
Excellent, great. So we are doing some work around the Uniform Residential Loan Application, the URLA, and for long-time listeners, you know that we had really had a very productive relationship with FHFA to get this regrouped for the 21st century with, I mean, they were doing the changes already, but we got added to them the housing counseling data fields so that housing counseling could be tracked when a loan is originated, attached to the mortgage, transferred to the mortgage servicer and the life of the loan, and it would allow lenders and servicers to refer people back to the original counseling agency if they had a delinquency. It would allow Fannie and Freddie to define how many loans were actually counseled in a loan portfolio and help hopefully have a positive impact on the pricing of those loan portfolios. I mean, there are many ways that this would integrate our work. It would match, after a great deal of work on our part, it was just way different, more difficult than you'd think. HUD has got a form for when somebody's completed housing counseling and is ready to buy, you would fill this form out and give it to the borrower along with their documentation for the application, and that would match the data fields and would allow us to be integrated into the process. And ultimately, this would be done electronically. When the new administration came in, and then Mark Calabria became the new head of FHFA, they have put on pause the new URLA format. And in talking with them and with their senior people, we have now heard that they're reviewing everything, and they've asking questions about why are we having the housing counseling data fields in there, and how would the mortgage originator even know how to answer these questions. And while they're excellent answers to this, we're very concerned that we might lose what we thought, which has been a very controversial process, a totally non-controversial issue, which has had support from lenders, had support from investors, had support from servicers, had support from, just about everybody. So trying to figure that out, and we will push hard on that. The place where it's also a big flashpoint is unfortunately around language preference, which is one that we really led the fight on, but many, many groups have contributed to. It was a big role for Americans for Financial Reform, Unidas US, and other groups have really done a lot of work on this, national capacity. And the idea was simply to allow somebody to say what they would prefer, what language they'd like to prefer to be communicated with if the lender has the capacity to do that. And it's the FHFA went back and forth on this a couple times. There's tremendous industry opposition for it. Obviously, lots of support from both the counseling and the consumer advocacy, housing advocacy world. We ultimately, FHFA said, yes, we're going to do it. With the new administration, the MBA and others have come back, again pushing on this, and this is at risk. We will do what we can on this issue, but this is a tough one. I think we're going to again have another firestorm of a fight around this. So I thought that the solutions were ones that really address the industry issues. They have not let this go. So both are issues we are going to be involved with and monitor closely, but thought you should know. One other quick thing, which is on the CFPB, they need to review and assess rule changes at the 5-year date, and they're doing that now on TRID, on the RESPA, and on the Truth in Lending disclosure items, and and CFPB approached us about getting input from housing counselors. We put up a notice on Tuesday, I guess it was, Monday or Tuesday. Within 12 hours, we'd already had 20 people sign up for it. Just want to say big thanks. We have closed that now, and we've got more than enough people on who are going to be participating in it. The CFPB will be the ones who reach out about moving forward on the next steps with that. But thank you so much for everybody's participation. That was a great turnaround. Okay, with that big note, thank you so much, everybody. We're going to rotate to the issue at hand. And I think just to frame the issue in the biggest terms, HUD housing counseling in general has a big challenge, which is by August 1st, 2020, we have to move our entire housing counseling staff into taking the certification test and passing the certification test. And a number of us put our heads together a few weeks ago because this is such a major issue. I really thank the participants who are joining this call, who are deeply influential in us helping to figure this out, and others who contributed as well. We're really trying to think about how to move forward in a way that gets many more people done. And I'm going to hand over the agenda to Ellie, who's been doing a lot of work coordinating this and helping to frame the issue. Ellie?
Thanks, Bruce. Okay, so let's jump right into this, because I will tell you that after talking with all of these presenters, there's some really great information here that I think is going to be really helpful to everybody. So our first presenter is Jana Bauer. She's the Senior Director at the NeighborWorks Center for Homeownership Education and Counseling. Jana, take it away.
Thank you, Ellie. Appreciate it. And thank you, Bruce and the NHRC team for convening this very important topic today. We're really pleased to be a part of the conversation. So I just, maybe next slide to dive right in, just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing at NeighborWorks America, both kind of at the global level from our training perspective and how we're supporting not only our network organizations, but the industry at large in trying to prepare and be successful on the exam, as well as to offer just some insights of information of different strategies that we've learned about that are in place that have seemed to be successful in this endeavor. So the NeighborWorks Center for Homeownership Education and Counseling, or NCHEC, is very committed to work, one of the HUD training providers, and has been providing a significant amount of training. And if we're thinking about in the broad sense, what are some of the tips or the opportunities for success, I would tell you that we believe one of the very first things is preparing in advance is key. And as a result, everyone approaches how they prepare differently, and many individuals are using a mix of strategies, in part because they have different learning styles. And so knowing the content that's in the study guide is primary to being successful. And individuals who are going to take the test have to read and review. And so as leaders in the space and supporting either your own journey in passing the exam or helping those under you in your staffs or in your networks, really driving home the opportunity to download the study guide from the HUD website and looking and taking a look at that and identifying those content areas is a key strategy, maybe not the only strategy, but a key strategy or component for success. We would say another key in preparing is to take training that's available. Some individuals find that just reading a study guide and reviewing it and then practicing through some of the other strategies that we'll hear about today, and then taking the exam is a successful approach for them. And others really rely on training, both what might already be available on the HUD website, but through the many different offerings that are available in the marketplace that you'll hear about throughout this call. And so some people find that by taking advantage of the available training after initial review of the study guide, offers them a different voice or confirms for them a different perspective, or really just drives home the content that they've reviewed within the study guide and really helps them be able to be prepared to then report that back out as it relates to the exam itself. Training really helps confirm the content, provide tips and tricks for memorizing, and the training really focuses solely on the content of the exam that's in the study guide. I know that many of the training providers and the training that's available really supports our broad work in the counseling industry around our jobs on a day-to-day basis. But this particular exam really is focused on those content areas and the approaches and strategies that HUD is looking for that can be found in that study guide. And so from a training perspective, really focusing on that in preparation for the exam may be different than what you're doing on a day-to-day basis on the job. As I mentioned before, there are many different training options available in person at a national level or local events. There are online faculty-led online webinars. Let me just tell you a couple things that are happening at NeighborWorks America. We offer 2 courses in person, and you'll see that on the screen. The first one is Ready, Set, Prep, Tackling the HUD Counselor Exam Step by Step, which is a 3-day in-person course that really focuses only on the content, the 6 competency areas related to the study guide. And through that, we'll give some tips and tricks for memorization, but it really is focused on knowing the content. And then followed by a 2-day in-person training course, Practice Study Success Test Strategies for HUD's Counselor Certification Exam. And in this, we rely on the content that should be known, whether you got it through training or it's in the study guide itself. And we find then in that particular setting, we do timed exam prep. We'll walk through, again, some memorization tips and tricks. We'll employ other strategies such as flashcards and other memory games, some of the things you'll hear about from others today, incorporated so that you can commit to memory. Next slide, please. So what are some of the other pieces that we're seeing that works? Again, utilizing as many training opportunities as possible in various voices. Some individuals just really need to hear it, the same information 2 or 3 different ways. Utilizing, if it's helpful to you in your learning style, peer support, flashcards, or study groups. And again, we'll hear some great opportunities about that today. This one I think is really geared especially at leaders that might be on this call. Really understanding the implication and the importance of encouraging counselors to take and pass the exam, regardless of how many attempts it may take, because it will have direct impact on your agency as of August 1st, 2020. And we sometimes are hearing about a little bit of a disconnect there. And so just really wanting to drive that home. There's availability of scholarships and other incentive campaigns. We actually heard about, here's one tip, we heard about a state intermediary who offered gift cards to their counselors at various denominations if they signed up for the exam and took it and passed it by a particular date. So they were trying to encourage and incentivize, and they got quite a number of takers within that particular scenario, and they did it at 2 different tranches. So we've heard of others that are helping repay the exam fees, but the incentives seem to be helpful in trying to help people move forward. And then just some peer recognition. I know within our network, the NeighborWorks network, weekly we're sharing with our network who's passed the exam and sharing other success stories amongst our peers through the NeighborWorks network, and I know others are doing the same. And individuals want to celebrate that milestone. I would say one other tip that we would offer, or things that we've heard, that seasoned counselors who are really good at their craft may have tremendous test anxiety, and that because the content in the exam differs from what they're really doing on the job every day of the week, because what they're doing on the job may reflect local guidelines or local programs, and the exam really looks at things on a general or national global basis. There's some anxiety there, and so embracing that, knowing that, and understanding the differences, again, back to the content that's in the study guide being so critical to the success at the end is really key. And then the other thing that we've found is for individuals who take advantage of training to take the test immediately after the training. The information is fresh. They've built up, boosted their confidence level. They've found that they're not alone. And we've heard testimonials back from individuals that have said, thanks, I just needed this last little nudge and I was successful. Or I might have taken it, didn't pass, but I know why I didn't, and I'm going to go take it again. And so I think part of it is confidence boosting in helping people take that step to take the exam. We just tell people, don't give up, try again, you can do this, and you're really not alone. So from our perspective, next slide, if you have specific questions for us at NeighborWorks America, you can send information to this web address, and we'll have our team follow up on available training or other strategies. And then certainly we're working in tandem with others and NHRC, so you can also provide input back through them, and I'm sure it'll get to us. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Jana. Before we move to the next person, speaking of whether or not people have taken the exam, I'm going to launch a poll and give about 10 seconds or 20 seconds for people to answer the poll. So it should be showing up. Oh, I see people are answering. So it looks like there's a lot of you on the call who have not yet taken the test. And one of the things I will say, apologies, I meant to say this prior to putting the poll up. If you are not a housing counselor, but are an executive director or a program manager, please answer this question on behalf of at least one of your staff people. If you know of somebody, you know, whether one of your staff people have or have not taken the exam. And it looks like, oh, we get a couple more answers. All right, I'm going to close the poll. So it looks like we have 77% of you on the call have not taken the test, and 23% of you have taken the test. So that's great. You're going to learn a lot today. So if we can move on to the next slide, I think we need to maybe go through 2 slides. Oh, nope, there we go. Our next presenter is Donna Lee Brooks. She's a rural development specialist with RCAC. Donna.
Great, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Great, thank you. So good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. And I just wanted to go through some tips to help executive directors and managers on planning for their counselors to take and pass the HUD Housing Counseling exam. If you can go to the next slide for me, please. And the next slide, thank you. So nationwide, we have just a little over 800 counselors right now that are currently certified. And of those 800 counselors, that represents 25% of the HUD-approved housing counseling agencies with a certified counselor. So at this point, and that was as of May 2019, we only have a little more than a year to go until all counselors are going to be required to be certified, which is on August 1st, 2020. So I think it's pretty critical that we have some additional input and encouragement from our management staff to help our counselors do their training so that they can become certified. So could we go to the next slide? Great, thank you. So our CEOs and directors need to be actively engaged and vested in assisting their housing counseling staff to become certified. Our counselors need the support of the agency and guidance to help them. The one thing I've found, and RCAC is a HUD training intermediary and also a HUD housing counseling intermediary, is the thing that I've seen repeatedly is that our counselors are very aware of this and very concerned, and it's not always that same level of engagement from the executive staff. So I think it's important that it comes from the top down, not only recognizing that this is going to impact your agency and your ability to provide housing counseling in your community, but also that your counselors need your guidance. So next slide, please. So we have a couple tips and for our CEOs and management to help their counselors. And the first would be to help them to establish a training timeline with a training plan with milestones incorporated into it. I've heard quite a few counselors say, I was just told that I needed to pass by August 1st, 2020 without really any kind of game plan. And sometimes it's difficult, especially when you've got clients coming in every day and, it's hard to carve that time out. It's hard to kind of project how much time you're going to need. So I think working with your counselors and helping them in establishing a training plan and a timeline with milestones is going to be helpful for them. And then giving them the time that they need to study, incorporating time to be away from having to do reporting and seeing clients, to be able to study and attend the training that they need to do. Because as was said earlier, this information it's really not intuitive, and it's also not the same manner in which we do business on a daily basis in our counseling work. So to help your staff use the practice exam and the knowledge assessment as guides, and we'll talk about those in just a second, and also celebrate the successes of your staff. So if someone passes having maybe a pizza lunch party or an acknowledgement in the newsletter or something to let them know that you're behind them and this is important and we're celebrating successes. So if we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So training resources are available free on the HUD website, and that's at hudhousingcounselors.com. I'm actually today conducting a training in Spokane, Washington, and I have 42 counselors here. And of those 42 counselors, less than half have actually even been into the hudhousingcounselors.com website. So this website was designed to give us, well, actually, I'll show you what it looks like. It has the information that counselors need to be able to get their training and also to schedule their testing to take the exam. So next slide, please. This is the online training resources from hudhousingcounselors.com. And you'll see if you look at the blue dots, there's a couple of different options, and everyone does have different learning styles. And I think it's important that we avail them as many resources as we can to assist people in getting their training done. So there's an interactive training, there's the study guide, and there's as of July 1st, we had knowledge assessment that was incorporated by HUD. So that's actually a new tool. And then I just wanted to point out on the left-hand side that this shows where the study guide is, and then the revision history. Actually, I think we'll talk about that in the next slide. I'm sorry, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what the study guide looks like. It has the 6 different segments that counselors need to have competency in. And when this is completely printed out, it's a little over 500 pages. It's a lot of information and it's a lot of material. And then on the left-hand side, the link that says revision history. The last revisions that were done were done in August of 2018. I would expect another revision sometime soon, but for the time being, anything that they pull off of this website as a PDF is going to be the most current and up to date. But if they have already downloaded this or already printed it, and there's been a revision, we need to go back and make sure they're using the most current version of that study guide. So I think the study guide is really the first place for people to start. It's really not the easiest material to get through, and there's a lot of information, but again, it's just a great resource. It's really kind of the backbone of the resources that we have from HUD. So on the next slide. We also have a practice exam that HUD has given us, and it's structured an awful lot like the actual exam itself. It's 90 questions. It's timed. They give you 2 hours to take it. It can be conducted in English or in Spanish, and it gives you ideas or recommendations on how you did. It doesn't tell you if you would pass or not pass, and it doesn't tell you the questions you missed, but it will give you feedback on how you did in each of those 6 core competency modules that we are expected to be competent in. So if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is what the practice exam page looks like. And again, it's in English or in Spanish, and you launch the practice exam from here. And go ahead to the next page. So my advice really is to allow your counselors time to practice over and over and over again with the practice exam. It does have 1 set of questions. There's 90, just like the exam itself. It's timed at 2 hours, and it has the same format, and it should give you kind of the same feel as the actual exam itself. If we go to the next slide. So a tip I have for counselors is to take screenshots of all 90 questions in the practice test, and make sure that that screenshot that you're taking shows how you answered that question, and take each one of these screenshots and put it into a Word document. Because once you've answered these questions, you can't get back in to see how you answered these individual questions. So taking screenshots, putting it into a Word document and printing it out, and then when you've completed the practice test, next slide please, it gives you feedback and recommendations. So the feedback and recommendation at first was a little difficult for me to understand, but it goes through the topic areas, and so for instance, under housing affordability, it says some additional review is recommended. And under home ownership, some additional review is recommended. And then obtaining tenancy says the same, some additional review is recommended. If you'll go to the next page. So this is the feedback we get from the practice exam. It doesn't tell us if we passed. It doesn't tell us, so, you know, really what questions we missed. So the feedback, this is actually my test, shows some additional reviews recommended in all topic areas. And if you'll go to the next page, under the support button in the HUDhousingcounseling.com website, counselors.com, excuse me, website, the feedback and scoring definition was given to us. So that first blue arrow says areas in which candidates perform well receive feedback that some additional review is recommended for continued success. That means you answered enough questions in that module to have passed the exam. And the next one is areas in which performance was marginal, received feedback that says additional study is needed for moderate improvement. And then the last one is areas in which performance was weak. They received feedback that says significant study is needed for considerable improvement. So if we could go to the next page, please. I'm sorry, I'm in a hallway of a college. Actually, if we could go back one, I apologize. So that practice and the practice exam feedback and scoring is really all we're going to get. So if the counselor takes that along with the screenshots that they did, they'll be able to decipher exactly what modules they need more work in. So if my fair housing module says I have significant study needed for considerable improvement, then I know that my fair housing performance was weak and I do need additional study in that module. So it is helpful in that manner. And if we could go to the next page. So the new knowledge assessment that just came out on July 1st is a different tool, and I found it to be very helpful. It really is looking more at your comprehension and how you apply that comprehension to their questions. So I believe there were 120 questions. It took me about an hour and a half, but they do give you more feedback than the practice exam gave. So on the next page, and this is the feedback I received from and it sends you an email also and tells you exactly how you did and what questions you missed and what questions you answered correctly. If you could go to the next page. So for my particular rating, I received, there's 3 levels that they're looking at. Level 1 talks about basic knowledge or facts, and level 2 is about your understanding of the concepts, and the level 3 questions test the ability to analyze or synthesize that information and make a decision or recommendation. I haven't gotten the description or definition of the result. If you see over on the right, it says the result was above average understanding in questions in this level. And all 3 of them say that. So I don't know if that is really good, or I sent a message to HUD to ask them if we could get the description of the different results, if there are different levels for results. But if you can see under L1, I had 37 correct out of 43. And on L2, I had 47 correct out of 56. And on, L2, and on L3, I had 32 out of 36. So it doesn't look like a stellar performance to me. There may be another grading result that's better. But again, I took this assessment really quickly, so I'm going to take it again and see if I can get the results and the outcome to be higher. But another benefit besides this rating, if we'll go to the next page, is it sends you an email afterwards, and it shows you not only how you answered the question, but whether or not that particular question was correct or not, and then the rationale and where to find that information in the study guide. And that's really helpful. And the manner in which this was set up, it gave a scenario, kind of a counseling scenario, a client's situation, and then gave you about 10 or 15 questions for that client's scenario. So I think this is a wonderful tool, and I hope to incorporate it more for our network. So just another valuable tool we were given. So I would suggest being able to utilize that, especially with the feedback, and that's great. So next slide. And then again, as we heard previously, that attending a live or online training is a complement to the training materials that HUD has provided for us. And I think it's vitally important that they also attend either an online or a live training, because some of this information, housing counselors get siloed. We end up performing one specific function. I'm a pre-purchase counselor. I don't know anything about foreclosure. So there could be segments that could be very difficult for people. And reading through that study guide can be dry. So I think the live sessions, trainings, and online trainings are just another benefit that can help a counselor navigate through this information to be able to take and pass the exam. And then the next slide. So one other decision that needs to be made, and I think from a management level, we can help our staff in making this decision, is whether or not to take that test in a live proctored setting or online in your office with an online proctor. The price is different for the live class, or excuse me, the live exam at a proctored site is $100, and online in your office proctored is only $60. But there's some big considerations to take if you're looking at doing it online in your office. If you have a robust IT department, it may be easy for your office to set up that online system to take the test. But if not, it may be better that they take it at a live center. So on the next slide, RCAC did a test taking tips with one of our consultants, John Bonin, and this is the link to a video clip that John did for us. It's also posted on the HUD Exchange, and this kind of goes through the pros and cons of taking this test online in your office and at a proctored live exam site. So I think for me, that's all. If I think.
Thanks. Thank you, Donna. So one of the things I want to kind of back you up on is the knowledge assessment tool. So I went through that knowledge assessment tool as well. It takes a couple hours. What I thought was great about it is not only did it tell me what I did correct, it told me what I didn't answer correctly. So it told me what was incorrect, and it told me why it was incorrect. And this is, I will tell you, there's been several comments in our question box about that, about the issue with not knowing, and comments in emails about not knowing what questions were wrong and where specifically more studying need to be done. And I can tell you the knowledge assessment tool addresses that and allows you to see where you need to, specifically where you need to do some more studying. And I posted the link to the knowledge assessment tool in the chat box. And as Donna said, it's also right on the HUD Housing Counseling website. I
think it's a very invaluable tool. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, good. I just want to jump in with one more quick comment that Donna Lee was making that probably could get a little bit extra reinforcement. And we've heard this from a number of providers, that setting aside time within the workday, so paid time that people can use to study and focus on that, rather than having to do it on their own time at home when they're tired and all that sort of thing, turns out to be highly valuable. So worth the investment. It's always difficult to take people out of the work stream and producing in the field, but this is a critical, as several have already said, critical issue. And so devoting some of the work day to giving people the space to do the studying, either in groups or by themselves, whatever works best for that team, is a valuable thing.
Well, and I will say, somebody did ask, what is the average amount of time that staff would need weekly and monthly to be allocated for the trainings and the test prep? So I imagine there's no standard, no exact amount, but Donna or Jana, do you have an idea of a general amount of time that an executive director or program manager should allow for?
You know, it's a really good question. You're right. There is no formula, I guess I would say. I think it's going to be individualized for each counselor. But I do think if you establish a timeline and a training plan to let them know that, you know, you're supporting them, we're giving you time to study, we're going to send you to the training classes, and we'll work together as a team, or, you know, however your office is set up, and then saying by, you know, August 15th, I want you to have your test scheduled. And at that point, I know I have between now and then to get it done. So
Okay. One other question that I think was directed to you, Donna, had to do with covering Access Exam Center.
Okay.
That's what it says. Please cover Access Exam Center. It was skipped. Was there something in your PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's on slide 9. So the practice test link is there on that page, and then the next one is the Access Exam Center. So the last slide I gave you with John Bonnen's is that what it's called? Vimo? Thank you, Vimo. Presentation actually goes through that in depth. So this is where you will set up your schedule your test, whether it be at a proctored center or in your office. So if you want a proctored center, you can set it up to say, where are the exam centers within 50 miles of my office, or within 10 miles of my office, and then what are the times available? And you would pay through that website also. And then it sends you an email with a code, and you need to take that code with you when you go to the exam center so that they can set you up to take the exam. But I think the best way to explain how that works, because there's an awful lot of information in there, is to take a look at John's little video clip. It's probably the best explanation I've seen of the exam center.
So, and we've posted that in the past, but that was a while ago. John was on one of our calls, but I think probably Ellie will send out a follow-up email with lots of the links that people need to know, and that should obviously be one of them to for the resources, so people don't have to try to scramble it off of the thing. The other thing we didn't mention, I think, it was downloading the handouts. So the slides, you can access all of them. If you look on the box on the right-hand side of your screen, there's one section lower down that's called Handouts. Click the arrow on that, and you'll see the 3 presentations that we've got. We've got PowerPoint slides for, and you can access all of those. And I think you'll have to do that during the call. Once the webinar is over, I don't know that you can access it.
Bruce, this is Jana. Okay. While we're on this topic, I was just going to mention in reviewing the clip that John prepared, or in trying to make a decision about the exam site. Sometimes the proctored sites are not necessarily very close to your office, depending on where you are, but important for the leaders to know that if you attempt to set it up in your office, there are some pretty stringent guidelines for individuals to take that online at their office or at another site, including how the video camera needs to be set up and what is acceptable. So as the leaders weigh those options, it's important perhaps to really become familiar with that in order to make choices and guidance for the counselors.
This is Melody. I just have one question I think is important for everyone before we move on to the next presenter. What is the actual deadline for passing the test?
August 1st, 2020.
Thank you.
Okay.
If a counseling agency does not have at least one HUD certified counselor on staff as of August 1st, 2020, you won't be able to draw down off your HUD housing counseling grant, and HUD will place your agency on inactive.
Let me add just one more just frustrating part of all this is that if you pass the test on the last day of July 2020, it takes them a while to get established through the FHA system, so you won't be up and running right away. So you really want to get everybody through and in the spring at the latest. Better to do it this fall and do everything you can, but it takes some time, and I've heard it's several weeks. So really coming down to the wire is just not the strategy for this. Do it early and get it behind you.
Great. Well, thanks, Donna. You are free to head back to your training unless you want to stick around for a little bit longer, but we really appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Thank you.
So I'm going to launch another poll about if you have taken the exam. We'd like to hear about your experience. So I'm going to give a few minutes for that, a few seconds for that. In the meantime, interestingly enough, John Bonin is on the call today listening in, and he emailed me a link to his website where he actually has many other opportunities for different trainings and exam tips and tricks that he has put together. So I am putting that in the chat box right now so that people can have access to that. Thank you, John.
And again, if you haven't taken the test but you're supervising somebody who has, answering for them, that would be great.
So another while people are answering the poll, another question that has come up a couple times is whether or not an executive director or executive director or program manager is required to take the exam. Jana, do you want to field that?
So on the HUD website, there are guidelines about the kinds of activities that an individual is conducting on their daily job and whether or not that would apply to an executive director. So for example, that need to pass the exam. So for example, if you really only have one counselor on your staff, and sometimes you fill in for that counselor when they are on vacation or they're out ill,
then you may want, as the executive director, to become certified so that you don't have a loss of service abilities if that counselor is unable to perform their duties. And so it really is on a case-by-case basis. We know of some executive directors or program managers who are, in fact, they don't do day-to-day counseling, but they are, in fact, obtaining the certification. So you'd want to review the guidelines that HUD has put out, but especially if you're from a small agency, I think it would be advisable.
Great. Thank you. So I hope that answers the question for people. I'm going to share the results of our poll. So, the main reason that I wanted to ask this question was so that people on the call could see that there are people who have taken the test and not necessarily passed it the first time. We're going to hear a little bit more about that from one of our presenters a little bit later in the session, but I want to just make it clear for everybody that we've been hearing this over and over again, that people are taking the exam and not passing it the first time, and that is not the end of the world. And it is happening in that way, and that part of what needs to be addressed, right, is your own test anxiety. And so some of the tips and tricks that we're going to be talking about as we move forward through this are meant to help with some of that. So keep trying, and let's move on to our next presenter. So I'm going to close this. And Cynthia Barola is our next presenter. She's the Learning Alliance Manager with Housing and Financial Empowerment at Unidos US. Cynthia.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Bruce, for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, we hear you.
So for those that are not familiar, the Unidos US Learning Alliance is a housing counseling training and certification program since 2008. And today I wanted to take a moment to highlight some of the support that our program has provided counselors to prepare for the exam, some examples of some lessons learned early on in our iterations of trainings and the research that we've found over the last several years, and updates to some of our tools and restructuring of our training model surrounding this particular topic, especially with the deadline looming. So if you want to skip to the next slide, please. So ULA has provided prep training since 2014. Around that same time, I was actually brought in as a consultant to help grow the online learning arm of the program. And our very first e-learning class was our HUD prep course that was accessible for the first time online. Over the last 5 years, we've trained an estimated 1,500 counselors on this topic alone in a variety of these formats to fit different learning styles. As mentioned previously, everyone, every individual learns differently, and we understood that very early on, that some people will prefer in-person trainings, others can learn online while still working in the office, some prefer short tutorials. So we've been providing this support and these types of training in these variety of formats since 2014. Some of the trainings that we do offer are 2-day place-based training, a 3-week online training covering all 6 core competency areas. And we even went a step further and found that those that self-assessed particular topics that were a little bit more challenging for themselves, or maybe just not knowledgeable in, we did separate the core competencies into 1-week online training courses, focusing on a topic at a time. And so regardless of the delivery format, our attendees can obtain trainings that provide study materials, provide interactive activities individually as well as in a group setting, mini quizzes, learning checks. And so you'll find that in a place-based training as well as our online format. Initially, when we grew the e-learning side of the program, we brought in a learning management system platform called Blackboard. If those that are not familiar, or if you are, you see it from time to time in major universities or community college networks of this learning platform that can essentially provide all the tools and interactions that you would receive in person online. And so we've found great success in being able to provide trainings in this format for those that may not be able to leave the office or may not have the capacity or are under budget constraints to be able to go to a place-based training. And so regardless of the format, we do provide scholarships, and about 98% of our attendees are on some form of scholarship, either through our HUD funding or privatized funding through Unidos US. So facilitators obviously are the first person that our attendees go to, and we want to make sure that those that are facilitating these types of trainings are current practitioners. So every single trainer that we bring into the team are current practitioners in housing counseling in one form or another. If you can go to the next slide. Early on, what we found was in informal surveys at the beginning of class, we started acknowledging a fear of taking the test, as well as not understanding where their knowledge base was strong in. And so tools that HUD has developed, ad hoc changes to our curriculum have helped to address these concerns. And so we identified that the fear of taking the test was a primary concern across the board in all delivery formats of our training. And so a little bit of research into that, we started finding statistics in terms of test anxiety and found that 18% of adults do have some form of anxiety disorder, and only a third of those 18% of adults can identify and seek treatment. And so the concern of test anxiety is prevalent, and maybe self-diagnose of understanding tips and techniques on how to combat that would provide helpful. And so we identified areas based off some research from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America that test anxiety symptoms can include the fear of failure, lack of adequate prep time, or bad experience from taking tests in the past. And so with those knowledge markers identified, we made some changes to our materials as well as to our HUD prep model. Next slide, please. So when we started surveying people concerning test anxiety, we found that their fear really stemmed from the fear of failure, and whether that was an indicator of poor performance, which would then lead to dismissal or demotion down the line. And so we took a recent survey of the last 2 years worth of attendees that have attended all of our trainings and asked them a series of questions concerning whether or not they've attempted the test. And so we saw a large gap between those who have attempted and those who have attempted. And so out of 200 respondents, we saw 61% identify them have not taken the test, have not attempted whatsoever, and 39% have. That survey is still open and we're still receiving responses today, and it still is remaining pretty consistent, hovering about 62%. And so we're seeing a large gap in terms of those attempting to take the test and those that are not. Comments as to why indicated that it was their confidence level, or maybe they weren't sure with the study material and how that best aligns with them preparing. And so drilling down to that particular indicator in terms of their confidence level, we asked additional questions, follow-up questions on whether or not those that did attempt, what helped them to take the test and pass it. Next slide. And out of that survey of attendees that identified that they did take the exam, there is a 68% pass rate and a 32% fail rate. Out of those that passed, 1 out of every 3 survey respondents said that practice tests were the most useful. And so the practice tests that HUD provides was key. And so with in our place-based trainings, we've added somewhat of a mock proctored exam portion to that training to assist the counselors in getting a feel for what that exam would be like. In addition, all of our online trainings, we do provide a mock exam, a mock proctored exam for 30 days with the ability to see which areas they missed. So specific questions, what the correct answer was, why did they didn't pass it. And so regardless of the delivery of the training, we have now provided that mock exam to all attendees for up to 30 days after the end of a training. We've increased learning checks for our online learning modules, and all facilitators as of last year that lead these types of trainings have to have taken the exam and passed, so then providing firsthand experience to our attendees and giving them tips on how to combat test anxiety. So one of the things that we found was that the test anxiety techniques and how to combat that was the most asked about in our place-based trainings. And so we're looking to incorporate that as perhaps a separate training to help counselors in the future for those that have not taken the test and still have that fear of attempting. And so with this being said, we feel that taking the test, using the materials to study overall will help a counselor better prepare as well as attempt to take the test. And what we've been hearing is that essentially, if a counselor walks in to take the exam, if they prepare to fail the first time around, it prepares them in lessening their stress, understanding that they have the ability to retake it, and understand where they perhaps need to study more. And so since there's no maximum amount of time that a counselor can take the test, we do now suggest in all of our training that immediately following a training to please register and attempt to take the test without focusing in on needing to pass it. If they attempt to take it first, that would help with their anxiety, help prepare them perhaps a little bit better on areas that they need to focus, and then lead to better results the second time around. So those are some of the key indicators that we have found in the trainings that we have offered over the last several years. We continue to make updates as HUD introduces new tools and tips. And again, I'm going to reiterate, as our previous presenters have said, practice, 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 and allowing a certain amount of time for the counselors to study is key. I know someone had a question in terms of how much time to provide a counselor, perhaps during the workday, and I agree that it is dependent upon the individual. But for example, our online learning modules, the comprehensive course takes about 3 weeks to get through. And what we require is at least 4 hours of dedicated time a week, because we have found that that is sufficient enough time to read through the modules, practice the activities, go through the learning checks to successfully bring somebody up to speed in all 6 core competencies. And so if we want to use that as a benchmark, I would say at least an hour a day to be allocated to each counselor to prepare for the exam prior to taking it. And again, all of this information, you can reach me. I know I didn't put my contact information at the end, so I do apologize for that, but I can be reached at cburola@unidosUS.org for any questions or follow-up to any of the data points or key priorities listed here today. And that's,
Great, thanks.
I think the last slide. Thank you, Ellie.
Yeah, so when you and I talked, Cynthia, I think one of the big aha moments for me was your bullet point here about the on-site mock proctored exams that you offer at your place-based trainings, and how much you see that really does help people get a sense, right? So you set it up so that it is exactly like taking the exam. It's in a room, it's set up in the same way, it's timed. Am I right about that?
That's correct. It's not a full 2 hours. We only dedicate maybe about an hour to this, and it's more of just to get a sense of the test, but the test structure is the same. It is multiple choice questions. They do go home with a list of 90 preset questions. And at the end of the training, if the instructors do run out of time, they do provide them with an answer key to then follow up on any additional questions that they may not have finished before the end of the training.
All right. Well, thank you, Cynthia.
So, Ellie, can I jump in on one quick thing?
Sure,
so,
go ahead.
So this, one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is that how to time the test to when you've done the when you've completed the training, and several of the presenters have already talked about that. And I would think that if you can schedule the test at the beginning of your training cycle, so that at the end, when you're finished, you then have a date for when the test is. If you can do that from the beginning on the assumption that you'll be able to take the test at the end of the process, you kind of lock yourself into that rather than taking the training and then choosing to schedule the test, which means that there'll be more time down the line. So trying to build it into the timeline from the very beginning, that the object is to take the test while it's fresh in your mind.
And I would completely agree with that, Bruce. In fact, one of the things that we're trying to plan out logistically, it hasn't been finalized just quite yet, is that our next upcoming place-based trainings, in part of the registration process, if someone can indicate after registering with us to take a training, if they show us proof of their registration to take the test immediately following the training, we would cover then an additional night of their lodging. And so we've got a couple of logistical things to kind of work out with that, but we're hoping to roll that out this upcoming fiscal year in future trainings, just to help increase the attempt rate to take the test.
Perfect. And I know some of the other training organizations are trying to figure out some of those same questions. Good.
Great. All right, so we're going to move on to our next presenter. This is David Young, who's the Director of Capacity Building at Housing Action Illinois. He's going to talk about an online study group that they have been conducting in Illinois and how we may be rolling this out to everyone nationally. David?
Thank you, Ellie. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is having good weather where they are. And I am David Young with Housing Action Illinois. We are an intermediary serving housing counseling organizations in the Midwest of the United States. And I'm going to talk about the online study group that we developed. The slides that you will see are actually slides from our current version of the online study group. So what I say might be a little bit different, but I wanted for people on this call to actually see some of the slides that we use as a part of our online study group presentation. So next slide, please. So we developed this online study group. Our state housing finance agency wanted us to provide training for housing counselors in Illinois, and we knew that there were a lot of other housing counselor or a lot of other individual certification trainings available, and so we didn't want to just develop a training like all the others, but we wanted to see if we could develop something that could complement or enhance some of the other trainings that existed. Next slide. So we worked very hard to do that and to couple those this training with tips and other strategies for taking an online exam. We were very much aware from talking with housing counselors in our network as well as in other organizations that a lot of counselors had not taken an online exam before, and there was definitely some anxiety about that. And so we wanted to make sure that we included in any type of training that we developed tips and strategies to make people more comfortable with taking the exam, because we feel that the folks that are taking these classes, they actually know their stuff. They're learning it and understand it, but if they are too nervous about taking the exam, then they're going to be concentrating more on that nervousness and not really concentrating on their knowledge base. Next slide, please. So as I said, the slides that we're showing are part of the current online study group presentation. We are making significant updates to this presentation that will be unveiled very soon. And you can see in the next slide that we talk about the certification process, how becoming certified, how all of those things work. We make sure to include that so that participants understand that entire process. Next slide, we talk about, just as we've heard in some of the other presentations, the testing options that are available, and we talk about, in the next slide, the best practices. So the first online study group that we did was in May of 2018. And then we also did a live version. So I should say this online study group, it truly is online, and people dial in using GoToMeeting. But we did do a special live version of this at our conference in October of 2018. And after experimenting with it a couple of times, we've decided to focus on doing 5 90-minute sessions over consecutive days. So that way, people are participating once a day for 90 minutes. We are able to cover all 6 of the topics as well as the test-taking strategies during that period of time. And as some of the other speakers talked about, is our goal is to make sure that people are getting a very intense understanding of the concepts and all of the modules, so that once they have completed the online study group, that they can go and take the exam soon afterwards while that knowledge is still fresh and they're comfortable with the tips and strategies that they've been given. So the next page. So as I said, we've using the 90-minute segments, which cover all of the topics and the test-taking strategies. And you see, this is just a slide that is the cover page for Tennessee. The next slide, please. So although we initially developed this training for Illinois, the online study group has been included in the Office of Housing Counseling's Training Digest, and we have had counselors from other states that have participated. Next slide. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about some of the feedback that we have gotten from counselors that participated. We had one counselor from New Jersey that said, "I have really enjoyed the webinars. I think they're a great help in preparing for the exam." Another counselor from California indicated, "I find the seminars to be focused on the key concepts we need to know for the test. I find that very helpful, and I thank you." And then finally, one in Illinois wrote, "I just wanted to let you know that I passed the HUD certification exam. Your presentation was very helpful, especially the questions at the end of each section. Thank you for offering the webinars. They are very beneficial." So next slide. And again, I just wanted people to have an idea on what this looks like. So you can move on to the next slide. And to the next slide. And so an important part of each one of the modules is we do test questions. We have everyone take the test questions, and then once those questions have been taken, we actually go over all of the questions with the answers, and it's very interactive. And this way, people get, as Donna Lee had mentioned, from the system that is now on HUD Counselor, that people get a real understanding of why, of which answer is right and why that answer is correct. The next slide just continues to show additional test questions. So next slide, and next slide, and next slide. And then we are also always, and you can move on to the next slide, please. We are also always including, and the next slide. We are also including tips to remember. So at the end of each module, there will be tips to remember so that people know what to focus on. Next slide, please. So far, we've had over 200 counselors that have completed 100% of the online study group. We've had probably about 500 counselors that have either taken one of the modules or more than one of the modules. And as I had mentioned before in the quotes from the counselors, that we've gotten some very good feedback, that people have felt that they've really gotten some good information from this. And thank you to, I should say thanks to neighborhood, to the National Housing Resource Center, and also to PNC and to Chase Housing Action Illinois will be able to expand the number of online study groups that it offers, and will be able to offer those free of charge to any housing counselor that wants to participate. So we thank NHRC. Susan?
Bank of America.
Bank of America, sorry.
And PNC, yeah.
Right. Yeah, thank you. So we thank Bank of America, PNC, and NHRC for helping us to do that. Next slide, please. And the next one. So our next online study groups will be starting in August 2019, another in December, February, April 2020, June 2020, and July 2020. And what I'm hoping is that July will only have 2 or 3 counselors in it, because everyone else will have taken it and gone on to take the exam by then. The August dates will be August 19th through 23rd. That's a Monday through Friday. You can look for the other dates on our website, which is housingactionil.org/events/training. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at david@housingactionil.org. But again, we will be expanding the online study group. We will be presenting a new version starting in August that will be much more enhanced graphically. And we look forward to your participation.
That's great. So I think that I put the correct address into the chat box. It's housingactionil.org/events/training.
Right. If you go to housingactionil.org, you'll see a tab at the top that says events, and then underneath that tab there'll be training, and it will give you the calendar of all of the trainings that we have upcoming.
And is there a limit to the number of people who can sign up for a particular study group?
So the study groups, we will be able to support up to 500 counselors at a time.
There you go. Bruce, did you have something to add?
Well, I think this is a really important development. So, you know, we know how great a job NCRC, RCAC, NeighborWorks, and Unidas US are doing on doing the kind of intense training. What Housing Action Illinois has developed is this sort of supplemental piece that moves people, that David a couple times in describing this as supercharges what you learned. And, you know, to what several of the presenters have said, people have different learning styles. This is meant to match people's needs, not have to travel. It's designed to be done online. And it's a piece of the puzzle. It's absolutely a resource. We've, Bank of America and PNC have contributed to pay for it, so it's available nationally to any housing counselor. So this is a piece of the puzzle to help you all move your work forward. And, you know, please feel free to use it. And I mean, I hope we could figure out also, if you're going to go for the December cycle that, or the August cycle, that you then schedule a test at the end of that, so that people can get plugged in right away when it's still fresh in their mind. But this hopefully addresses some of the challenges people have of not always being able to travel and being able to get into a study program that matches their needs. So hats off to Housing Action Illinois for both being generous enough to do all this, and thanks to the funders who've helped to pay for it.
Great. So with that, we will move on to the next presenter, and that is Claudia Wilson Randall. She's a consultant with Community Development Network of Maryland, and she's going to talk about really helping with considering study groups, you know, individual study groups, grouping up people, and what their experience was in Maryland. So Claudia.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
We can hear you.
Excellent. So what I just want to acknowledge the my peers in the industry, because everything that has been said thus far, I'm with I would say nearly 100%, and some of the information that I'm going to go over is just going to re-emphasize those same things. But I just really want to acknowledge my peers in the industry, and I know that our folks, our housing counselors in the state of Maryland, have benefited from a lot of the training and the presenters prior to me. So if we could just go to my first slide. So this is just a review of what's on the HUD certification and sort of the highlights of what is there, which is that one of the reasons that you need to really be on this is that you will score higher on your HUD applications for funding. In Maryland, they also just added this to the scoring for the current round. So if you have a certified counselor, you get bonus points as part of the state application process. Most of the stuff we've just gone over. The exam is 2 hours. There are 90 multiple choice questions. It's a closed book exam. It's a randomized exam, so you will not get the same questions if you take the exam more than once. So you should be aware of that. You can take the exam in your office or at a proctoring center. In general, the criterion centers, there's a lot of them in the state of Maryland, so we have been recommending that people take it at a proctoring center unless you're in the rural parts of our state. A lot of folks also have been reporting that HUD's been talking about the exam costs going up in 2019, but the advice I would give about that is you need to take this exam. There's really no way around it. I think the exam cost going up is just another reason, to pile on. The next slide, please. So here's what we did in Maryland. We did speak to our peers in Illinois, New Jersey, California. We sent out a survey to all of the agencies in the state about the test and what their concerns were. Then we held webinars in 3 areas that were of most concern, and we engaged 6 coaches across the state to help counselors take and pass the exam. And we paid those coaches a stipend. Those coaches were counselors who had successfully passed the exam. They were people with varied experience. So some of them had passed the exam on the first try, some had taken it twice, and some had taken it 3 times. But that varied experience also helped guide what we did. And we were able to share their varied experiences with the coaching that we did around the state. The next slide, please. So when we went around to the state, we held 2 3-hour coaching sessions in each region. So in the Eastern Shore, we held 2 sessions. In Prince George's, we held 2 sessions, and so on and so forth. We connected a coach with each one of those coaching sessions. And what we tried to do is build some community where people were sharing strategies, sharing information, connecting people with complementary concerns. And I can just say that I was doing that more informally. So where there was instances where one person would say, I'm really good at foreclosure, but I'm struggling with housing affordability because I don't do that. And I would connect the people who had different strengths with each other and said, maybe you guys can work out a way that you can study together. We also made games. Ellie posted these earlier in the handout, but we made a game of Jeopardy with a teaching tool online, and we made a bingo game with answers from the test. And we did this because it helped people gain some information about the test and also just become more familiar with what was on there in a fun way, as opposed to just writing down notes endlessly and reading or going through webinars. This actually helped them with this test material in a fun way. The other thing that I did is I just sort of sent weekly emails. Every other week I would send an email and say, hey guys, how are you doing? Who's studying? Who's taking the test out there? Just really to encourage people. and create a positive community around the emails, around the test culture. And I also would send emails on snow days when school had been canceled in the state, and I'd say, great, this is a great day for you to study. You're not going to see any clients. Everybody's home. We also, CDN, the Community Development Network of Maryland, we also reimbursed organizations for the cost of the test when they passed. Next slide, please. Just what did we learn? We had to create a positive, you can do it culture. I think some of the previous speakers have talked about this. We just really needed to be positive. A lot of people have test anxiety. A lot of people were just worried about taking the test, kind of thinking that it was overwhelming and that they couldn't do it and they wouldn't have time. So we really had to, that's what I recommend to the managers on the call, is that they really think about creating that, celebrating success, celebrating when people were passing the test, making sure that you have an actual timeline with actually times that you're going to study for the exam, and that people do it. I also really recommended that people get out of their office, even if it was like, hey, we're going to go to Starbucks, and from 3 to 5, we're going to study the first module together. Because I thought it was really important for people to be away from their offices and also away from distractions that pull them away from the material. I think in general, passive studying alone it does not work. People really need to, work with the material, because there's a lot of scenarios on the exam, and I thought that was really important. The other thing that I think we learned is that people need to get their score. So if you don't pass the test, you're going to get a score. And what we found out, just anecdotally, is that the people who weren't successful, they had missed the exam by less than 50 points. So you need a 500 to pass. And many people we talked to had gotten 470, 480, 492. So they had missed maybe 3 to 9 questions at the most. Next slide. So I would just really encourage people to know what their score is and how close they were. Because if you are not successful on the first try in taking the exam, I would highly encourage you not to wait, 4 months and start all over again, but rather to take the test soon after. So this, a lot of folks have talked about this. You really have to know what type of learner you are. Are you a visual learner? Are you a kinesthetic learner? Are you somebody who learns when they have pressure or when they copy stuff? How do you actually process information? You should know that about yourself. There's a lot of quizzes online that can help you figure out what type of learner you are, and then what types of strategies will help you the most. This is really a custom experience. So what works for one person won't necessarily work for everybody. So just be aware of that. Next slide, please. The next thing I wanted to just say is that we did not focus on the practice exam. We focused on the knowledge checks. We found the people that were successful really got a lot of the knowledge checks, and that new knowledge tool that was just put on is going to be fantastic. I would highly recommend that. I thought it was great. Also, it will help you review questions and with counselors in your agency. I just think the process of doing it in a group so that you all review the questions and you know what the right answers are, that's really important. Going to a neutral site and studying, for some people, that's not going to be at work and it's not going to be at home. So you have to find out where it is going to be and where they can give the material the most attention. The presenter from Unitas US, you did a fantastic job on test anxiety, so I'm not going to say anything about that. But also, I do want to say, don't be discouraged if you fail the exam. You need to brush yourself off and take it again within a couple of weeks. Don't squander the time that you've put in. I know we had a couple people who found out that they were really close to passing. My favorite example of this is 2 people who studied together. When they took the exam, one person passed, the other person didn't. And the person was so annoyed about it that she went back, and 2 days later, she took the test again and passed. So I just would just really, you got to keep pushing ahead and be encouraged that you can do this. Next slide, please. The majority of the counselors in Maryland identified tenancy, fair housing, and the calculations as the things that they were most concerned about. Some people took that to mean that that was the only areas that they should focus on, but I would just say don't take that as a strategy. Make sure that you look at the whole exam, because it's a randomized exam, and one person said to me, I was really worried about fair housing. I spent all this time on fair housing, and then when I got there were 3 questions on fair housing. So I just would think about the whole exam, not just areas that you think you're weak in. So this is just a suggestion. Make a poster for each module with the answers. Think about ways that you can memorize the ratios by putting them on your refrigerator, on your computer, or your phone, so you see it every day. You're going to have to memorize VA, conventional, and FHA, and the ratios for that. There's no way around it. The other thing is you can download the study modules. I'm getting a lot of background noise, actually. Download the study modules onto your phone or your reading device. You can put it on your iPad or your Nook or whatever, but consider putting it on those devices so you can have it for yourself. And you need to have the 500 pages of study materials, but that may be another way that you can get the information and it can be repeated again. Next slide, please. Find ways for you to have fun and study the material. Make up songs, take yourself reading the modules and play it back in your car, move your body. All of the things that we learn in teaching and training sessions in NeighborWorks sessions, it's time to apply those things to ourselves. The other thing is moving your body. People retain a lot more information when they walk backwards. That's actually a proven fact. It helps your brain retain information. But, sitting stagnant, listening to webinars, or just reading the material probably won't make it stick. The other thing is, try to figure out how to get yourself into a more relaxed mindset, because you do retain more. Also, find a friend or a colleague to hold you accountable for studying. I, as the consultant for the Community Development Network of Maryland, often was that friend. And I was often the person who was like, hey, how's it going? Have you studied? Have you scheduled that exam? How are things going? But I think that does really help to move people along, and again, in a positive way. Today, have your counselors write down a plan for studying and taking the test. It's really critical that they write it down. Don't just say, yeah, we're going to take the test in December. Make sure they actually write down and have some intermediate steps in there. What are they going to do? What action are they going to take? What are their strong and weak areas? What days are good for studying? And I would say, even as the summer comes, that may be a time in many agencies that there's less volume, and your busiest days and your heaviest days. Figure out when during that your least busy times that counselors can really focus on taking that exam. So next slide, please. So these are 4 things that you can do today. Actually, I said 4 things, but there are 5 bullets. But anyway, register your agency for HFA Connection if you haven't done so. Designate an administrator. This is a step that takes time. So this is something you can do today. Today, you can go and print out the modules and put them in a binder for your agency. If you haven't done this, this is something you can do today. It doesn't take anything. Go back to that part of the website and print off, put them in a 3-ring binder and have it printed for your agency. Block off some afternoons that you will study for the exam as an agency. So if that's, 2 people on, 2 people off, whatever it is, make a plan. I put this, a couple of things on here that I thought were also interesting. There's a 7 days documentary. It's the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act last year. It's on YouTube. This is a way that you'll learn more about the Fair Housing Act, and it's something that's on the exam, and it's a different way of actually receiving the information other than just reading about it in the module. The other piece of this is there's a TED Talk by Ricardo Lujan. It's basically about how to retain information and how to triple your memory. I think it's a great tip. I think, Ellie, you said you went ahead and watched it because I recommended it. It's a great way for you to think about strategies where you can remember information more quickly. Finally, my last slide is, I just want to give people, don't lose sight of the big picture. Your clients need you. Low and moderate income buyers, non-white borrowers, many demographics still dream of home ownership and building wealth in this country. So the work that you do really matters. And I've been working in this industry for a while now, and I just don't lose sight of that. And this is just something that you have, this test is just something you have to get past, but you can do this. And remember that all the work you do with your clients as they're facing challenges, generally as a sector, you're encouraging, you work with your clients and you take them through all kinds of challenging times and help them overcome barriers to home ownership and help them retain homes and help them save and all of that. So you need to do that work on yourself and really think about how you get yourself into a growth mindset. And if you think, oh God, I'm a terrible test taker, you're not. You might not, you may have been in the past, but you can get better at this. This is, it takes work, but you've got to be thinking that yes, you can overcome these barriers. So with that, I'm going to stop. And I know we're kind of don't have much time. So I just want to be really encouraging about that.
Thanks, Claudia. I will say that I put the two YouTube videos that Claudia mentioned, I put links to them into the chat box, and I did indeed watch the Triple Your Memory TEDx, and I can tell you it's worth the 15 minutes that it will take for you to watch it. So I encourage everybody to do that. We're going to move right along because we have two more presenters who are going to be talking about some really interesting ways to get some support and help for folks to get ready for this exam. So our next presenter is Kira.
Ellie, just before you go, so we're going to go over the 2-hour limit. So we don't want to lose anything. So please hang around for a few more minutes after we go over the second hour.
Yeah, and we do have several questions that people I'd like to be able to give people the opportunity to hear answers to. So Kira Gardner-Marshall is a HUD certified homeownership and fast track advisor with Neighborhood Housing Services of Baltimore, and she's going to talk about a Facebook group page that she created. Go ahead, Kira.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So, so my name is Kira and I'm a housing counselor, and I created a Facebook page for preparing for this exam because I was a participant in Claudia's work groups, that Claudia, who was just speaking, and as I was participating in these work groups, it seemed like all of us seemed to really have a lot of questions, and I wanted to kind of have a way for us to all reach out and connect to each other and also expand our communication to housing counselors around the country. Next slide, please. So I developed this Facebook page, and this is a screenshot of it to kind of give you a look at it. And so this is for housing counselors, by housing counselors. Everyone on the page is in practice of taking the exam, or they have taken it and passed, and they're on there still to help others. We started back in the fall. We have about 130 members now. I know that the slide says that we have 108, but over the last week or so since I made these slides, we're up to about 130 members now. Next slide, please. When I was about 2 months into having this page, I got a phone call from someone at HUD that wanted to talk with me about some of the posts that were on the page, because I guess we were violating some of HUD's policies for studying for the exam. Basically, they were a little upset that some people were getting on the page and posting things that said, hey, I saw a question on my exam that said X, Y, and Z. HUD doesn't want anyone talking about the exam contents. You know, basically, any time that you're talking about questions that you have seen on the exam, it's really important that you're saying something like, there may be a question that's styled like a multiple choice question, or you can't say, oh, I saw a question that was just like this. And they were very, very adamant that they didn't want any screenshots of their study materials shown on the Facebook page. And so from time to time, if you join this page, you may get a message from me saying, hey, I just need you to phrase this post a little differently. If you could move on to the next slide, please. And I have a screenshot of some of the posts there. You know, counselors are connecting and sharing things that they're doing to prepare for the exam. You know, we're trying to share a wide variety of content that really helps a lot of different learning styles. We have John Bonnen's video shared on there, flashcards that people made on Quizly, you know, Word documents. We also have the link to the Housing Action Illinois webinars that they have. And we really try to keep it so that, you know, there's really something for everybody. Next slide, please. In addition to people sharing the resources that they're using to prepare for the exam, people are also kind of talking about their frustrations. You know, as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people that have taken the exam a couple of times, and it's, you know, they're trying to get some insight as to why it is they're not passing. We also have some people who are not getting much support from the organizations they work for to prepare for this exam. You know, a lot of organizations out there feel that this is something that is portable for you. And when I say that, it means that the certification that you earn is yours as long as you're employed by a HUD certified agency. So like in my own example, I am an employee of Neighborhood Housing Services of Baltimore, but if I go to another agency 5 years down the road from now, I could still take that certification with me. So we are noticing that there are some organizations out there that really want counselors to spend their study time, you know, during their own hours at home. That's another thing that we're seeing here. And we also share a lot of successes. You'll see a lot of posts on the page that people are saying, hey, I finally passed the exam. People are really excited about it. And we really want to expand this so that we're hearing from a lot of people. So, you know, after the Q&A session is done here, please take a moment, if you want to go to the next slide. This is a link to the page, and I know that they're going to share these resources. If you want to go to that next slide, please. There you go. So that's a link to the page, and I know that this is going to be shared with all the participants. So get on there and join. Feel free to post any questions that you have, any concerns. Let us know if there's something that really, really works for you, something that really didn't work for you. Just all things HUD exam related, you could discuss on this page. And I know that we're right at our time, so thanks for inviting me on this call. I really appreciate, you know, having all the support of all these leaders on this call. I used all of the tools that were mentioned today and then some, and Claudia Wilson-Randall, her workshops were amazing. So I really thank the support of everyone involved. So thanks.
Thanks, Kira. And I will let everybody know that I did post this link in the chat box, as well as a link to the Quizlet page that Kira mentioned. So the Quizlet page is really interesting because there are several people who have gone in there and created flashcards and quizzes around the HUD certification exam. And there's actually even, when you go to that link, you can see that there's Quizlets and flashcards for separate modules. So very useful. So we're going to move right along into our final speaker, Ibejoke Akimbawale. She's the Director of Financial Equality Center and Housing Counseling Network at the National Community Reinvestment Center, Reinvestment Coalition, excuse me. And she's going to talk about a study group that we're going to try to put together. Ibejoke.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I appreciate it. And thank you guys for sticking on the line for just a little bit longer. I promise I'll make it pretty quick here. I've got the easy part. My colleagues have pretty much said all that we can in terms of encouraging you guys to move forward with the HUD certification exam. Before I dive into the study group, I do want to piggyback on the sentiment that was mentioned earlier, and that is the importance of executive directors, managers, and the leadership of the housing counseling organizations being involved in counselors' planning process for the exam. As folks have mentioned earlier, there are, as of May, there are some 802 counselors that have passed the exam, but there are some 12,000, a little over 12,000 users that are actually registered for the housing counseling website. So we certainly got a long ways to go. Just as a note again for EDs and managers, you guys certainly have the opportunity to be involved in the full process, and that's setting goals for your counselors and also determining the true cost of what it will take for folks to complete the exam itself, whether that's budgeting for different training opportunities for your counselors. You'll want to take those things into consideration, as we've already begun to see some of the implications of what it means to have trained certified counselors on staff. I know we saw this in our most recent HUD NOFA, and as folks have mentioned earlier on the call, we'll certainly continue to see this run true for a number of funding opportunities. And so we don't want to miss out because we're waiting till the last minute to certify our counselors. So again, just encouraging all EDs and managers and leaderships within their organization to be involved in the process. All right, next slide, please. All right, matchmaker. So fantastic thing that's happening as soon as we end this call today is you will receive a survey, and that survey will get some information from you guys so that we can pair you with study groups for folks that are interested in participating in this. This is a significant commitment and an undertaking by the team at NHRC, namely really many thanks to Ellie Pepper for all of her great work on this. So what we'll do following this call is you guys will have the opportunity to complete that survey. We'll collect some information from you, and we will make matches. And again, the hope of this is to provide an additional support for you all to be able to make it through the certification process by connecting you with other counselors in the field. I will take the next slide, please. Alrighty, so the process for this is going to look like you'll complete the Survey Monkey, if you can tab for me, Melody. You'll complete the Survey Monkey when this call is completed on today, you guys will have until the 19th of the month to get that survey back to us. Following that, you'll receive your group assignment, and we will make introductions to your group on the 29th of this month as well. So basically, again, this is an opportunity to connect with counselors across the country. We'll go a little bit more into that matching process and what it means in terms of connecting you with folks that may have more expertise than you in certain areas, so that you have a diverse group and that you're able to be successful with that. So after you receive your group assignments, of course, you want to study, but we're also going to create opportunities for you to engage in some technical assistance with intermediary partners. So you'll have the opportunity to, one, meet with your group, and that, again, to go over your goals and study on your own, but you'll also have the opportunity to receive some technical support up until the due date from intermediary partners. You'll receive a schedule of dates that are available for that, so that you guys can answer those tough questions that you may not be able to get out of your group working experience. And then, of course, we want you to take that exam. Right. Next slide. All right, so the Survey Monkey, it's a really short survey for you guys. It's just a total of 13 questions. Again, we want to make certain that we're gauging what your level of experience is, your learning styles, what you're comfortable with in terms of meeting options, whether that's via phone, video conferencing, screen sharing, and those sort of deals. And so that will help us be able to make the most informed matching assignments for you guys. Next slide. Right. Again, so your groups will be matched based upon a variety of factors, limited to your learning styles, your different goals, whether that's, I want to take this exam within 1 month. We're going to pair you guys with peers in the community that have comparable goals, so that you guys can progress at the same pace and time. We'll also try our best to pair you with counselors that may be a little more experienced than you are in different areas. We don't think it's the best idea to pair a bunch of foreclosure experts together. We want to make certain that the group has a healthy mix, so that you guys can really support each other during the different challenges that come up when preparing for the HUD certification exam. Next slide, please. All right, and so in this group, some of the roles will consist of a team leader, a team recorder, a team scheduler. Definitely you'll receive some recommendation in terms of the opportunity to be a co-team leader or co-recorder, so that you all are kind of sharing in the role and support to move your group towards the goal of passing the certification exam. And so in that, we're asking that our team leaders really keep the group to task, and you make sure that there's no counselor left behind. If you guys have a goal of taking the exam within 1 month, that you all are having conversations about, hey, have you registered, whether you're doing it online or you're going to a physical proctoring site, and having those conversations and setting the agenda for your meeting sessions. We'll also make certain that your group has a team recorder, so that you guys can take notes and that you can kind of track your group's progression over the study materials that you've reviewed together. And also, you want to identify someone within your group to be a team scheduler. So this person will be responsible for making certain that they send out the calendar invitations for your meetings, whether you guys are going to be using a conference call line or some other medium, that they can keep you guys to task and make certain that you have actual set study opportunities in place. Next slide, please. Another thing that we're taking into consideration, and I would encourage you to think about before taking the survey today, is what are your goals? And so again, EDs, if you have the opportunity to connect with your staff, certainly wanting to have a conversation on this, but things that you may want to take into consideration. Do I want to take the exam within 1 month? Have you already taken an in-person training opportunity from one of the national training partners? If not, there are tons of scholarship opportunities that are available on the HUD Exchange that you guys may have seen. As folks have mentioned earlier on this call, the sooner that you take those kinds of training opportunities, you want to take the exam. I mean, you're the best prepared, you've received so much information, and it's really fresh in your mind. Are you 1 to 3 months out because you've got a training opportunity coming up and you want to be certain to take advantage of those opportunities later? Or is this a question of budgeting for your organization? So you really want to be very intentional about goal setting for the exam, because that's going to dictate how often you want to work with your study group and when you'll plan to pass it, of course. Next slide, please. How to connect. And so what you will receive, you also get some information from us on in terms of guidelines for your group. But because you'll be connecting with 3 to 5 housing counselors across the country, we are hoping that you will connect via webinar, conference call, and screen sharing. 2 resources, absolutely free resources for doing that is Jitsi and freeconferencing.com. I'm personally a fan of the Jitsi. It allows you the opportunity to, you all can pull up yourselves on the video conferencing, you can do the screen sharing, and you get to create a personalized link so that you can always share it within your group. And so these are really fantastic materials in terms of being able to connect with your actual study buddy group. Next slide, please. All right, so following the survey, as we mentioned, you'll receive your group assignments, but with that, we'll also provide you study group guidelines and recommendations. So if you are saying you want to take the exam within 1 month, we will recommend a study buddy, a study frequency. And so whether that is you meet with your study group 3 times within that month for an hour interval, and the different topics and things that you should be trying to discuss, and how you can measure, hey, if you need to spend a little bit more time, how to have those kinds of conversations. Again, following that, you definitely will receive some information on technical assistance opportunities and how you guys can sign up for tech support days with the various intermediary partners. And if there are some on the line that would like to volunteer to host a technical assistance day, definitely please reach out to the NHRC team. And so we'll have those opportunities for you guys to legitimately ask questions. Maybe things have come up within your group that you guys are stuck on and you need additional support. So we'll have some of those training providers available for you, and we'll continue to flush out materials to you guys in terms of developing studying materials and recent updates. I know as it was mentioned on the call earlier today, there was a new assessment that came out that's available on the HUD Exchange, just so that you guys can keep abreast of the updated materials as they come out. And you also have the opportunity to opt into email and text alerts to remind you to register for your exam and different opportunities that may come up as we get across the finish line. Next slide. Alrighty, so again, as we mentioned, that survey is going to go out immediately as we finish this call today. It'll be due back on the 19th, and you'll receive your group assignments on the 29th. Again, this is an amazing opportunity to connect with counselors across the country that, again, may have more experience in different counseling services types than you have, but all for the goal of supporting each other through this certification exam process. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Ibajoke. So just so that people know that are still on the line, I did put the SurveyMonkey link into the chat box. I'll be sending out all of these links via email, but it is in the chat box if you want to access it. So Bruce, do we want to take some time to answer some questions?
Let's take a few minutes.
Okay.
There's quite a bit, so I'm just going
to
do questions. I'll just throw them out to the larger group. Are there any groups working to help people who are taking a test in Spanish? Anyone?
Cynthia, do you know?
I'll answer that. Yes, this is Cynthia from Unidos US. So we have done a couple of place-based trainings that are bilingual. Both materials were presented in English and the presentation was done in Spanish. And we initially had done that early on before the test was confirmed that it was going to be available in Spanish. And so we are in the process now of converting all materials into Spanish, as well as providing one online in this upcoming fiscal year. But definitely anybody that is interested in bringing a specific training in Spanish to their agency, or maybe a network of agencies that would like that, definitely reach out to us and we can tailor something together. We've done that for several groups in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. What percentage does a counselor need in order to pass the test?
I'll take that. That's 500. So it's not a percentage, it's a score of 500. Apparently, the answers are not all worth the same points. So, different questions are worth a different amount of points. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you. Someone had raised a comment saying that the online questions aren't realistic because they're based on demographic areas. Person seems to have to forget everything they've been practicing as a counselor and only focus on what HUD wants. Any comments on that?
So this is Jana. I'll take that. I certainly can understand kind of the thinking around the question. I think one way to consider this is it's a national standardized exam based on the practice and terminology and guidelines that HUD has in place. And that may vary based on your actual practice. For example, working with a potential buyer who's going to purchase a home, there may be specific guidelines, FHA guidelines, and then there are always the specifics or the overlays from the mortgage lender or other acceptable practices. And as counselors, we can understand that if we're working with in our local area, we know what those day-to-day practices are. But for purposes of the exam, it is that national scope from a standardized approach, which does make it challenging. But that's why being familiar with the content is so crucial, because it may vary from what you're really practicing day to day. Hope that helps.
This is EBJ. Okay, I'd just like to quickly add to that. This is also why we'd recommend attending a training from one of the national training partners. While this information does vary, a lot of the courses, the prep courses do focus on taking the test the HUD way and sort of helping folks kind of navigate it, because, again, these facilitators are highly trained in reviewing it from that perspective.
Thank you. After August 2020, when hiring a new counselor, how long will they have to take the test?
Again, this is Jana. I have not seen anything specific to what that guideline will be with guidance from HUD at this point. Maybe others have. It is my understanding that you must have certified counseling staff in place to provide services as of that date. And I know earlier in the call there was a comment that you had to have at least one certified counselor on staff. I have heard HUD say that only those certified counselors may conduct counseling activities within your organization as of that date. So it's not necessarily that you are okay because you have only one counselor. If you have 5 counselors, the other 4, if they're not certified by the first, wouldn't be able to continue to do their counseling activities per HUD's guidance.
This is EBJ, okay, and I might add that the point, a part of the intention regarding the certification itself is that it is a requirement of the job function. So a lot in us legitimizing and strengthening the work that we do, folks seeking counselors that are coming with the certification or requiring it up front.
Great. I hear an echo, forgive me. How will the HUD exam be addressed to an employee with a learning disability because a lack of special training is not provided?
Hi there, I'd like to answer that. So if you have a learning disability, which I actually have two, I am dyslexic and I have ADD. I chose not to, there's an ADA exception that you could use to get more time. And what you would do is contact Criterion for more information about that. They will be able to provide you with more time to take the exam, but nothing else. So I don't know where that leaves a lot of our counselors who have learning disabilities. I was lucky enough to be able to get through the exam with only taking it once and passing it, but I know that's not the case for everybody. But they would be able to contact Criterion to get that allotment for additional time.
Okay, thank you. Does the certification have an expiration date?
No, it doesn't.
Yes.
It's a lifetime. So once you've done it, you're done.
Okay. Who can counselors contact at NeighborWorks to request a place-based training to be held in their state?
So you can send an email to the email that was listed on the slide earlier. Certification, go and get it for you. So certification@nw.org, and that request will be sent to the proper person for follow-up.
Thank you. Did the incentive funds come out of the HUD grant, or were they other funds that were used to provide gift cards, incentives, etc.?
The example that I gave was done through in the state of Virginia through their housing finance agency, and I don't know what the source of funds were.
Thank you. I believe this was answered already, but management, such as executive directors and managers, don't have to take the exam, correct?
If they're not providing direct counseling services, they don't have to. But on the other hand, if, for example, you have a counselor out for several days, they can't step in and cover for them, as an example. I mean, if you're not doing any counseling functions, then no, you don't have to. It may be wise for managers to do it.
So to specify, if someone provides housing capability education but not housing counseling, do they have to take the exam if they still provide services?
Somebody else want to take that? I mean, this is a question about education, but not the direct counseling.
The question is related to what you just said. If a person provides financial capability education, do they also need to take the exam? So I guess what the person is trying to ask, is it specifically for those who just do housing counseling, or can it be for anyone in a housing counseling agency, even if they provide other services, do they still have to take the test?
So, I mean,
in Maryland, we've been recommending that financial capability counselors take the exam, period.
And I would agree with that sentiment.
Part of it was the whole emphasis of this was also about professionalizing the industry of housing counseling and financial education. And so we've just been really trying to present that standard because what previously, the criticism of housing counseling as an industry was that people were, weren't consistently educated, that different people in different areas had different standards. So this is a way that everyone meets a certain standard.
So I think that's great, and I agree with that. I think there are some organizations that have a model where people do sort of an educational activity, but not the counseling activities, and things get referred to the counselors, and they may choose to do this differently. I mean, I think your recommendation is a smart one, and it's best for all of us, but there may be organizations that, because of the way they've designed their model, won't necessarily fit into that.
So if I may, on the HUD website, on the HUD Exchange, there's an FAQ about the certification, the requirements, who needs to take the exam, what kind of activities fall under the mandate. So if an individual is only providing a certain kind of service, that may not require the exam, but if they're providing a related kind of service, that may. So I would encourage you to look at those FAQs directly from HUD to determine if that, how that applies within your situation.
Thank you.
And I would just mention, oh, sorry. This is okay. I would just mention that this rule is not doesn't just specifically apply to housing counseling programs. I think the Office of Housing Counseling made it very clear that there are a number of other HUD programs for which this rule should be applicable because the services and functions as described, and it may include housing navigation, which they believe that this certification should apply to as well. So that the tool that was just referred to would definitely be helpful for folks trying to determine that.
Thank you, EBJK. This question, I believe the answer is no. Specifically, the question is, will you lose your job if you don't pass the test? So they can still keep their jobs, but they won't be able to provide housing counseling services.
That is my understanding, yes.
I mean, just to be clear, they can't do housing counseling anymore. I mean, that's the threshold. After August 1, 2020, you have to be certified in order to have the job as a housing counselor.
Correct.
And one step further, Bruce, the agency is in jeopardy of losing their HUD status and available funding.
But just in case the question was about if I take the test the first time and fail it, will I get fired? I think the answer to that is no, right? So it's not an automatic firing if you take the test and fail it. Just in case that was the intent of the question.
Sure. And I think that's a really important point, Ellie, because I do think some of the anxiety and fear that we heard about from a number of the speakers really has to do with that. I'm afraid if I don't pass the exam the first time, I'm going to lose my job. So for the leaders on the call, helping allay those fears and working together for success is really critical.
So I have a question then. Let's say, for instance, it's August 2nd, 2020. They didn't pass the exam. So now they can't provide those services. They're at risk of their HUD status, et cetera. Is there a period where they can reapply for that status or take the test? Or is it like if you don't apply by this deadline, then you're blacklisted or something?
So the test will continue to be available, right? Because anyone new to an agency would maybe need to obtain certification. But I don't know that HUD has made it clear what will happen in that scenario. Maybe others have, yeah.
At least from what we've gotten from HUD, is that the agency itself necessarily won't lose it. It's just or lose their status. It's a temporary ineligibility marker that they place on there until they can then prove that they do have staffing that has passed the test. And so the final details of that have not been explained that I have seen or heard, but it's not an automatic, like August 2nd, you don't have anybody, you've lost your status as an agency. I believe it's a temporary marker that HUD applies to that particular agency.
Okay.
Well, I think I wanted to bring up also, while we're talking about this passing and failing, a couple of people mentioned the cost of taking the exam, and so while failing it should be, it is an option. The issue is that in smaller nonprofits, that gets to be $100 each time they take the exam can be an issue. So I would just want to address that, and I invite others to address it as well. But my thinking is it's important for staff to have this certification, and without it, you aren't able to access, without having certified counselors, you aren't able to access HUD funding for what it is. And so that's definitely a consideration. And I invite others to chime in on that.
This is EVJOK, and I will say this is also points to the fact of why it's so critically important that EDs and managers and the leadership of the organizations are involved in this conversation, because while there are a number of subsidies that have been available for organizations that are, or for counselors taking the exam, either through folks that receive HUD or have received some of the incentives that were mentioned by folks from other intermediary players, the certification itself does stay with the counselor. And so some organizations have made some decisions about, well, they'll cover the first 2 attempts, past that, it's the counselor's obligation, or they will cover the cost for all counselors currently on staff. Past that date, any new counselor coming in, they'll be required to cover the cost of the certification themselves. And so I do see this varying organization to organization.
Here's a question. Someone said before that one of the attendees pretty much said they believe that the cost to take the test is $100, and they were saying that if counselors on their team were failing it and had to retake the test at the same cost, for smaller agencies that starts to really add up. Is there a solution or assistance for such agencies who possibly can't afford to consistently retake?
Yeah, I would think about talking to your lender partners about this. There's an increasingly heightened awareness about the importance of people passing this test, and when we had the challenge with the Housing Action Illinois of not being able to figure out the funding to make this available nationally. Their main funding source was the Housing Finance Agency in Illinois. Several lenders just stood up and said they wanted to help and understood this. And I would say that for them to set aside $1,000 for people to take the test is just not a big deal, and you should absolutely lean on them for things like that.
How often can someone take the exam if they don't pass initially? Is it continuous?
Can you repeat that question?
How often can one retake the exam if they do not finish it? Is it like a driver's license, or is it like you have like the LSAT?
I don't believe that there's a maximum amount of times you can take it, at least not in any of the details that I've read through.
Great.
So if somebody wanted to take one right after another, they could.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's everything.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. Don't go away. We got a couple more things to do quickly, and we'll be quick. Here we go. So please send us pictures that tell the story of housing counseling. We're actively still using them. They're now on Facebook, as you all know. Let me just mention one quick thing. Is I know there's people on this call who are new to NHRC and to the Leaders in Housing Counseling calls and listserv. So if you are, you know, we're just an advocacy program to make housing counseling, nonprofit housing counseling, much stronger around the country. We do a lot of work in Congress to get greater funding. We're doing things like this. We're also doing programs to figure out new funding streams for housing counseling through innovative programs that many of the local groups are doing around the country, or some of them doing, and we're trying to make them available to you all. We're doing work to educate ourselves around the best practices of our work and our resources. So to get to know more about this, if you're not already, we do twice a month calls on the first and third Thursdays. You should be on the Leaders in Housing Counseling listserv. You can go to our website, which is www.hsgcenter.org, and upper right-hand corner, you'll see join our mailing list link, and you can start getting our emails. We're glad to have you if you're new to all of this. I would just say NHRC is a membership organization. Email me if you need the membership application, and it's also on the website. Having membership allows us the flexibility to do the kind of lobbying we do and things that we can't get funded for from other sources, and it's a valuable piece to our work. Really appreciate, we know that organizations are under financial strain right now, and really appreciate the fact so many groups have not only joined but also now regularly renew. You do get a discount on your credit reports as a result. Some of the, and groups are saving hundreds of dollars, and some, if you have larger volumes, thousands of dollars, and that's all great. We'll continue doing the work no matter what, but it really helps us if groups are members, and it makes us all stronger. I want to quickly remind people that our next call will be 7/25/19. This will be on health and housing, and we'll have some innovative programs that other counseling agencies are doing that intersect with the health world and are expanding both. I mean, there's a lot of money in health, and there's been a broader recognition that housing is a critical component to healthy living, and we need to be more involved with that. We are not doing anywhere near enough of what the opportunities are. We should be at the center of many of these conversations. So Ellie's really worked with a bunch of different groups to see what they're doing out there, and you'll see that on the call. We're open to other ideas if you want to send them to Ellie. And then on the 1st of August, we're going to have a program about reaching out to underserved communities. This will be the kind of innovative programs that are being done now and still in formation. So if you've got some kind of niche programs that you're doing that reach people that aren't in the traditional stream of our work, please shoot that to Ellie as well. We may not have a second call in August because of the holidays. We'll see if there's tremendous demand or for opportunity. We may jump on something, but right now we're planning on not doing that. And I think that's it for us on the call. It's been really terrific. I have to say, we've had over 370 people on the call. Thank you, everybody, for hanging on for as long as you have. I think this will be useful. And Ellie will get some follow-up materials with links out as well. So thanks to all the presenters, doing important work and very, very valuable. Thanks to everybody, and thank you for the good work you're doing out there.